Amazing. My name is Morag, and I am the Africa Programs Associate for Innovation Africa. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And as you know, I know Vicky and Adam, and we traveled all the way to Uganda together. I was just saying that it's a little strange to see Vicky here in the US because I've only known her in Uganda. So, we're getting used to that. But I'm here just to give you a little bit about the work that we're doing. And before I start, I just want to thank the rabbi who spoke right before for really setting the context for us, right? Because Innovation Africa is spreading human rights in Africa, and we're really using innovations that we've seen and ideas and resources that have come and inspired by Israel and bringing it to my homeland, which is Africa. So I was born in South Africa, I grew up in Botswana, and I am from Zambia, which is all in the southern part of Africa. And I'm actually a scholar of human rights. I got my master's in human rights from Columbia, so it was interesting to hear your perspective and how it all comes together. And I focused primarily on how culture and rights come together and how it looks different in from one country to the next. So Innovation Africa kind of does a little bit about that. So I'm going to start off by showing you guys a video that describes how exactly we're bringing Israeli innovation to rural African villages.
Where's the popcorn?
I also think you might have to rewind a little bit.
One, two,
Can I help?
Innovation Africa was founded 9 years ago with a very simple mission, which is to bring Israeli startup technologies to transform schools, medical centers, and most importantly, to pump water. We are operating in 7 African countries, and we have so far installed startup technology in over 100 places. The reason why Africa is still in poverty is because of the lack of energy. Because there is no energy, people are still searching for water because there is no energy to pump water. People do not have access to vaccines and medicines because there is no electricity in medical centers. And because there is no energy, people cannot get a good education. And yet, when you look at the sun, there is so much energy, so much potential. And if we could just harness the energy from the sun, we can change it. We've been using solar energy since the creation of Israel. Almost on every building, there are solar panels. And what we are doing at Innovation Africa, it's simply by bringing the same technologies, simple technologies, to make a change here in the villages.
Thank you for having come from Israel to take us away from the place.
Thank you very much for the clean water.
You are our fathers and mothers from Israel.
Because today Israel is a strong country, because of everything that has been invented, I think it's our responsibility to help.
Are you ready? Yes! 1, 2, 3, go!
mean, that's a pretty great explanation of the work that we do. So I'm going to just go into a little bit more detail about how we do the work that we do. So this is an example of a health center. This is in Uganda, if I'm not mistaken. And those are mothers who have babies. We have pregnant mothers there. And they are at the health center because there's either an emergency, their child is sick, but they are at a facility that doesn't have access to light. So you see those little lamps at the bottom, those are kerosene lamps, and they give off a very thick black smoke that when you actually inhale it, you start to cough. Clearly not the best environment to A, bring in a baby, and B, for a sick child to be sitting there. And then on top of that, we have issues of the staff members at health centers who are unable to actually see what they're doing when they're trying to, go through a procedure with their patients. Alongside this, they don't have the accurate temperature in their little fridges that they have, or they don't have fridges at all to keep their medication. So you have medication that's going off, which means there are babies that aren't getting vaccinated, mothers that aren't getting vaccinated, children that don't have access to medication. And if you go to the next slide, please. And this is a school, and this is the other part of our light projects. We also power schools. And as you can see, the kids are kind of really, their faces are in the books because there's not sufficient light using these kerosene lamps. And in the schools that we go to, again, we're in the most rural of areas. Most of them don't have electricity in their own homes. So it's not like they can do homework at home, switch on a light, and they're good to go. They usually don't have enough kerosene, the oil that goes into the lamps, so the family can cook and do the chores for the evening and then let their children do their schoolwork. So the schoolwork kind of goes to the wayside. So the schools have set up these programs where at night they can go and all gather together and do their work. But there's still not sufficient resources for that to actually be effective for their education. So Sivanya Ari, who I know who has presented here before, our founder and CEO, decided that solar energy is really such a simple way for us to resolve some of these issues that we find across Africa. If you can go to the next slide, please. And here's, oh, sorry, just kidding. I thought I knew what my next slide was. This is a perfect example of what it looks like in Africa. In sub-Saharan Africa, you can see that there really is not enough light. And with solar energy, there's an abundance of sunlight in Africa, and we're really not in the position to harness that into electricity. And that's where Sivan comes in. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So this is Sivan at the health center that I just showed you, and this was the day that we did the installation. And if you just keep going through the slides, Adam, you can see the impact that they have. So now the women, you can just keep rolling. The women, have access to light, so they're no longer forced to put a cell phone in their mouth, for example, and use the little torch, the little light that's at the bottom to actually deliver a baby. And that does happen. Like, we've spoken to nurses in the field. And they now are able to regulate the temperature because we provide vaccine refrigerators. And so all the children and women and kids who come along, they are able to go to a health center and know that they're going to be taken care of to the extent that they deserve. Over here you see a child who's getting a vaccine. And then this is one of the schools that we've done. And in the same way, they have a great program where they want students to be able to come together and study together so that they can really break the chain of poverty through education. And by providing electricity, you can now see the distance between the students' faces and the books that are on the table, because now they have sufficient light, and it really changes the entire environment of education for them. So we have another video, and this shows just how quickly and simple it is to provide this resource to students in, I believe this is Uganda as well. That was brightly lit, right? there was really no lights around, right? I think you may have seen a couple of cars going by, but that's it. And I know Adam and Vicky can attest to that. We really are in the most rural of areas. So as we implemented these projects, we also wanted to think about how we can make them as sustainable as possible. So we don't have this relationship where we keep going back and having to give, but rather, and I'm sure people are aware of the term teach a man to fish, right? So we really want to set them up to be able to sustain the systems and the resources that we're giving them. So how do they pay for a light that goes out, or a switch that breaks, or a wire that comes apart? And we were thinking to the other issues that they have in the rural areas and how we can resolve them. And one of them is this idea that they have cell phones, but nowhere to charge the cell phones. And we are now providing electricity, so why don't we connect those two issues and have this be part of our sustainability model? So in each of our facilities we have a small business, and so for the charging stations, for example, people in the community come, they charge their cell phones, pay a very small price. All of that money is collected, put into one solar account, we call it, and anytime there's a maintenance issue that comes up, they go into their solar account and they pay for it. And that way we're there to facilitate and train them as best we can, but they really take complete ownership of these projects. We've also implemented other small business ideas, like we have a barbershop in schools. Most of the students are required to completely shave all the hair off of their head to avoid spreading any sort of skin disease or lice or anything like that. And instead of them going into the market to get it done, they can do it right there in the school, because we've now set up this small business barbershop, and they sometimes have like their nice big signs. It says barbershop, and it's very cute. And so yes, so this is us really trying to make sure that we are addressing these issues from every angle that we can. On the other side of our work, we do water, clean water systems. And this is an example of a water source in a rural village in a number of the countries that we work in. Usually this is the only sort of source that they have access to. So there's nothing like turning on a tap and having access to clean water. They take this and they make do as best they can. And this is used for cleaning of pots and pans, washing of clothes, washing, bathing, cooking, drinking water. So this is really their only resource. And then you also have domesticated animals like their cows and goats and all the rest, who also are only able to use the same water source. If you go to the next slide. And then we have, in certain areas where it's the dry season, the water there's so little water in these wells that people have to sit and wait for hours for the water to actually come up from underground again and fill up, so they can fill up their little jerry cans one at a time. So you can only imagine how long it would take for that to actually happen. And if you go to the next slide, again, this is another example of the sort of water source, and it's clearly contaminated, clearly dirty. It causes skin diseases, of course stomach diseases, so not having access to clean water really goes through every part of a person's life. It affects all aspects. So again, there's Sivan who's in the field, and we try to see how we can connect solar and the resource of water, which is evidently there, it's just underground and they don't have access to it, and how we can really bring this all together. So what we do is drill all the way down into the ground after we know where exactly the water is by doing a land survey, and we go anywhere between 30 and 150 meters below the ground into the aquifer. And I'm sure you've seen the typical hand pumps that they have in Africa. Usually they can only provide those sort of hand pumps with I don't know, anything between 10 to 15 meters. So we really are in areas that can't even have a hand pump, right? The water is only available much, much further down. So once we finish this process, we kind of create this large structure over here, which is kind of a funny thing to see when you're in the villages. You have all the huts and everything, and all of a sudden there's this huge tower. And if you see the panels that are up there, they are connected to a pump, which pumps the water from deep underground all the way up back into that tank. Once you have the water in the tank, we have between 10 and 12 taps within a community, which means at one given time, between 10 and 12 people can turn on a tap and have access to clean running water. So if you just go through the next slides, it kind of shows you the process of bringing the water from underground above ground. That's the solar pump. That's the community. They all help out throughout the entire process, and they even make their own ladders, which you might be able to see over there, and they push it and they pull and they heave, and then it's up. And if you go to the next one, this is an example of a water station. And again, we really allow the community to decide how they manage the water station. Every tap has a little committee, and the committee decides, how they're going to take care of it, and it's really such a sweet thing to see. And if you can play this video very quickly, this is a community, and I was actually here first. Love that video. But one thing that always amazes me is whether we come to a community for the first time or whether they're having a big launching ceremony for a clean water system that we just provided, the level of joy is consistent. They are really the most joyful people that you'll come in contact with. And often you think, wow, these are the conditions you're living within, and you still are able to hold so much joy and share it with people. It's really something. So connected to a lot of our water projects, we also do drip irrigation. And we use the water that we get from deep underground to try and sustain the quality of produce within a community. The drip irrigation is a very simple system. It's a hose, it has a few holes in it, again an Israeli innovation. And the idea behind it is regardless of the time of year, regardless of whether it's a dry season or a wet season, the community will have access to good produce. We get a community of women who need it most, who need the money most, and we get them together, we train them, and we have them go through the process. So they go through the harvesting, they sell the produce, they keep produce for themselves and their family, and that means that they have increased the amount of income that's coming into their household. So you'll see with the next couple of pictures examples of the drip irrigation. There's a lady getting some eggplant that she's just planted. This is a market, and those are women who work in our drip program. And beyond that, we've also found that women have really used this opportunity to find other ways that they can generate income within their communities and for their families. So you have women who are using this quality water to create bricks. So they have a whole process that they do, put the mud together, they bake them. It's really a whole system that they have. But because they're using such a high grade of water, the bricks don't break, which means that their houses are staying up for much longer. They can also sell these bricks, which means that there's more money coming into their households, and so children have more clothes, they have shoes on their feet, they have books that they can go take with them to school. And there's, I think, one other example of a small business that's connected to our water. Women are able to buy cows and sell milk, and the milk is really the best milk in town because the cows are drinking good water. So it really does touch every aspect of their lives. And something else that I want to touch on is how it affects students. So a lot of times in these villages, women and children are the ones who are responsible for going to the well and collecting the water. If you have to sit there and wait for the water to come up above ground, then you have students who should be in class, but instead they're waiting to receive this basic necessity for themselves and their family. So because they're able to now just turn on a tap, that means that there's less time spent collecting water and more time spent in the classroom. So that's very briefly the work that we do at Innovation Africa. We have 150 projects currently. We're in 8 African countries, and we're impacting over 1 million people. I think we have another 7 projects that we're hoping to complete by the end of the year. And these are a few people who have been with us to the field, who have adopted a project. They've seen the need, they've seen the connection to Israel, and they've been motivated to do the work that we do. And if you go to the next slide, another aspect that I should touch on is how we try to make as many connections between Israel and our people on the ground. And so we bring Israeli engineers who come and train our people, and they are also training them in our remote monitoring system. So the remote monitoring system, if you keep going, is an Israeli technology that we have connected to each and every one of our projects. And it measures the inflow and outflow of energy, whether it's in our light projects or in our water projects. And so anywhere that we have access to internet, we can log in. I can log in on my phone, on a laptop, and you can see if every project is functioning to the extent that we expect it to. Are we pumping as much water as is needed for a community? Are the lights working, and are they being switched on when we expect them to be switched on? So it really creates a higher level of accountability for our projects because we can't be there all the time. If there is an issue, if you just go back really quick, if there is an issue with one of our projects, if you see right there is a dip in our graph, we get an alert that says something's gone wrong. And so we send our team out and say, can you figure out what's going on? And as you can see, it took a couple of days and it was up running again. And anytime we have someone who's sponsored a project, we give them access to this database so they can log in and see how their project is doing. Because of this technology, we've received an award from the United Nations, and we also have a consultative status with the UN. And that's basically all I have to share with you today. And this is something that Sivan always says in her presentations, that if you look to the source, you can sometimes find the solution as well. And we really do find that that's the case in our work, because the sun has really put hardship on a lot of the people in Africa, but we also realize that it's a source for us to provide a lot of joy and a lot of opportunity for them to thrive.